Star Wars, Marvel, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Dragon Ball, Naruto. I could go on. I love these franchises and I'm sure you do too. But I know I'm not alone when I say that each of these franchises in recent years has not been putting out the most satisfactory content. And if there has been satisfactory content, it has been far too little. Now, I'm not saying that all of it is bad, and obviously this is all a matter of opinion, but I know I am not alone in saying that I truly miss that feeling of wonder and on the edge of my seatness that these franchises used to give me. And they still do give me that feeling if I rewatch or reread the good stuff. But I also want new content, new stories. We also live in a world where the use of AI is very prevalent, and don't get me wrong, I think AI is cool. The heart and soul that comes from a human creating art and stories cannot be replaced. In light of all of this, it's time we come together as a community and create fresh, new, engaging stories that we all love. Ones where we can actually work together as the fans to create these stories together. Not just one person writing a what if scenario for one of their favorite franchises, but all of us collaborating together to create new stories. So here is my idea for how this could work. I'm going to give us a potential start to a story to kick things off that you can then continue. You would continue it by commenting on the video what you think should happen next in the story. I would suggest you title it something like Part 1, because then people can read your comment and then reply to your comment with what they think should happen next after what your continuation of the story was. And they would title their reply with Part 2. Just to help people be able to keep track of the chronological order of that comment, chain, story, continuation thingy. I'm working on a catchier name. Now listen, if you don't want to use my initial story kickoff, you could comment on the video with your own totally unique start to a story. And if people like it, they can reply to your comment to build off of your story. So what happens next is I would make a few different kinds of videos showcasing your comments in the video. The first kind of video would be me choosing one of these comment chain story continuation thingies and then showing the screenshots of those comments, reading them off, and then I would add my continuation of what I think should happen next. The second type of video I could theoretically make is just showcasing several of these different comment chain story continuation thingies without actually adding my own continuation. This could even potentially be done as a stream. We'll see how things go. You could even make your own videos in a similar format to me. Now, if you do this, I would appreciate it if you did mention my channel in your video. And also let me know so I can watch your video because that sounds super fun. A bunch of content creators making original stories that people in the comments contribute to, watching each other's videos and contributing to each other. Now, like I said, I will begin a story, and if you guys like it, you can continue based off my story in the comments, or you could start your own story in the comments below. Now, let me give you a basic idea of what my story is. So characters from different dimensions are going to end up being teleported into the same dimension. These characters are going to have to work together to fight against enemies who are also being teleported from different dimensions. These characters can be wildly different. You could have mages and ninjas end up being teleported into high-tech aliens worlds, allowing for elements of sci-fi and fantasy to be part of the same story. These characters could also end up teleporting into different dimensions altogether once they cross paths, allowing them to explore all kinds of crazy settings. This kind of story allows you guys to add whatever kinds of characters that you want and have them go to whatever places you want them to go. Now, of course, let's keep things safe for work and appropriate, and please refrain from using AI because I want this to be a collaborative effort between people using their own creativity to add to the story. And it goes without saying that I did not and I will not be using AI in this project. Now, I want to make clear that there is an optional, overarching plot that I have in mind, which explains the origins behind these characters being transported from different dimensions, as well as an overarching main antagonist and conflict to the story, for all our characters to overcome. But again, this is optional, because I also want to give you guys the freedom to steer the story in any direction you want to. But just in case you guys don't end up planning far ahead for the story, I want to give my optional overarching plot as an option to make sure the story does not ever lose focus and go totally off the rails, in case you guys just want to focus on adding a cool character and just focusing on adding a cool battle or something. So this optional backstory overarching plot is more or less a safety net for us to fall back on, to keep the story from having no direction in case none of you want to worry about steering the ship and would rather just enjoy the ride, adding little bits and pieces to the story as we go along. I'm going to explain this overarching plot after I do the small story kickoff, as well as explain a bit more in detail about the optional appearance and abilities of the characters I'm going to have in the start to the story. Alright, let's kick this thing off. A massive mothership floated motionless in space. On board, the captain of the ship, Zav, patrolled the ship, looking at a holographic map on her wrist, which showed all the different areas of the ship, doing a thorough analysis to ensure that everything was in tip-top shape for the mission ahead. Suddenly, she heard her chief of security speak to her through her suit. "Zav, we have an intruder on board the ship." "What? How could they possibly get here?" "We don't know. There was a flash of light and suddenly they were here." Zav looked at the holographic footage of the intruder. A tree person in a brown cloak with a large wooden stick. "I'm heading to greet our unwelcome visitor. Have they done anything threatening?" "No, it's just standing there." Zav entered an elevator that rapidly transported her to the area where the intruder was. The tree person stood in the hallway with several automatic turrets aimed at it. Zav approached it slowly, keeping her distance. "I'm impressed you made it on my ship. I'll admit that it seems impossible for anyone to sneak on here, seeing as we are in the middle of space. How did you get here?" The tree person tilted its head in confusion. Strange. Although the sounds I am hearing you make is unlike any language I have ever heard, I somehow understand you. I assume it is the same for you, as you hear me speak." Zav was shocked. As she heard this thing speak, the language that came from its mouth was totally foreign, but she understood the meaning that the creature was trying to convey in her head. "How are you doing this? What kind of tech do you have on you? Wait, you never asked my first question. How did you get here?" The tree person chuckled in a soft and jolly manner. Forgive an old tree for not having the best social skills. I'm just rather confused at this situation. To be frank, I have no idea how I got here. I was walking through my forest and suddenly I was enveloped in a flash of light, and now I am here." Zav narrowed her eyes skeptically under her mask. "Yeah, sorry, but I don't really buy your story, tree thing. I don't mean to sound threatening, but you better start speaking some truth, or I might have to put you in an involuntary stasis until we can figure out if you're a threat or not." The tree person chuckled once more and nodded its head. "I understand your position, but I assure you, I speak the truth. My name is Rami Magikai. I assume you have a name." Zav let out a small chuckle as well. "You've got a sense of humor, I'll tell you that much. You don't need to know my name, Rami Magikai. You need to, Zav. We have another intruder. Flash of light, just like last time." "You're not serious," Zav said as she looked at the holograph that displayed in the air before her from her wrist, showing the intruder. This time it looked like some sort of fungal mushroom person. "Friend of yours, Rami Magikai?" Rami's face turned into an expression of fear. "No, he is not my friend, but I do know him. He is extremely dangerous. Please, allow me to assist you in dispatching him. You don't understand his strange and dark magic. You are not prepared. I beg of you." Zav smirked under her helmet. "Strange and dark magic? You serious?" "Please, we must act quickly. I know you have no reason to trust me, but the urgency of the situation outweighs the time needed to earn trust," Rami said in a desperate tone. Zav was put off by how starkly different his demeanor had changed from the jolly chuckler just a moment ago. She narrowed her eyes under her mask as she contemplated her decision. "All right, the ball is now officially in your court. I'm honestly so excited to see what y'all come up with. Now, here are a few more details about the appearance and abilities of these characters that you can choose to use or not. Totally up to you. Rami Magikai is a tree, but in his world, not all trees are stuck rooted to the ground. Some of them have the ability to walk around, some have the ability to use powerful magical abilities, some, like Rami Magikai, have the ability to do both. Rami is 7 feet tall. The top of his head is filled with leaves akin to hair, and his face had a big bushy beard of green moss. Rami has the appearance of a tree that looks like an old man, but rather than having 2 arms and 2 legs that most old men have, Rami has several branches that extend from the side of his body that he can use and move the way someone would use hands, similar to the way an octopus moves their tentacles around. And where feet would be on an old man, Rami has several roots that sprawl across the ground, which he can use to move and walk just as well, in fact better, than an old man can, similar to the way a crab walks on several pointy legs. When he wants to rest, these roots dig into the ground and he stands motionless like most trees. Laying down isn't really a thing that trees do, even the walking ones. A long brown cloak covers his body, and Rami brandishes a long wooden staff as he walks around, which looks like a large knotted wooden branch, but very sturdy. Rami uses this staff to help him perform powerful magical abilities. Rami protects and tends to his forest. Rami Magikai can magically cultivate and grow seeds from different kinds of plants that are tucked away in several different pouches on the inside of his cloak. He cannot throw an infinite amount of seeds, as he has to slowly replenish his supply of seeds over several days, but he has enough at any given time to last him for most battles. He has 3 different magical abilities that affect these seeds, as well as all plant life: Nourishing Water, Nourishing Fire, and Nourishing Light. Nourishing Water is water with a green hue that causes the growth of the seeds to accelerate considerably, and then causes the plants to grow bigger rapidly. Nourishing Fire is green fire that does not behave like normal fire in burning things, but when it makes contact with plants, it causes them to undergo a rapid transformation into a different type of plant with evolved unique new abilities, slightly mirroring how forest fires sometimes naturally occur and trees need the fire to happen in order for them to release new seeds to give way to new life. Nourishing Light is a green light which, when it makes contact with plants, causes the plants to become stronger in their strength, durability, and whatever other unique abilities they have. Rami does have the ability to use these on himself. However, the reason he does not do this constantly is for several reasons. First of all, the effects of the nourishing water, fire, and light take several hours to wear off for him, which means for the nourishing water, he could use it on himself and become bigger, but he will not shrink down for several hours, and it may not always be advantageous to increase in size. If he uses the nourishing fire on himself, he does not have complete control over what he would transform into, and that transformation will take several hours before it wears off, and it may be difficult for him to use his staff or reach the seeds in his cloak in that new form, and therefore limit his toolset. In addition to this, him using the nourishing water, fire, and light on himself cannot increase his own magical power, because he cannot use his own magical abilities to exponentially amplify his own magical abilities. If he does use the nourishing light on himself, it will make him stronger and more durable, but it will not amplify his magical abilities, and he cannot use magic infinitely. He can only use so much before he has to recharge his magical power. So if he does use nourishing light to boost his strength and durability, that is some magical capacity he could have used on his seeds. He also is able to amplify his ability to create nourishing water, fire, and light through the use of his staff. He uses his abilities to tend to the growth of the forest, as well as for its protection. Zav is an alien, and her appearance is that of what we know as the typical gray alien, the kind we associate with flying saucers, although her body is not as slender as a typical gray and is more similar to how humans are shaped. She is about 5 feet 7 inches tall, and she has a dark red power armor that covers her entire body, including her face, which she can retract her helmet automatically to reveal her head. Zav has 3 floating cubes about the size of a fist that detach from her power armor and orbit her, floating in the air. One of these cubes shoots out a blue mist that causes constant damage when enemies are in it. One of them ejects a blue energy whip which can be used for offense and also to grapple onto things and maneuver. And one of them shoots out a beam of blue energy that does constant damage that increases the longer it is aimed at an enemy, like the light of the sun from a magnifying glass. She can extend these cubes out a few feet from her body, and they can be used for effective melee as well. She can also step off these cubes to launch off of them for defensive and offensive maneuvers. However, she can only launch a few feet off the ground. She can't infinitely jump off these cubes in the air to fly. She is proficient in melee combat and has a swift fighting style, with great ability and speed because of her power armor, and can seamlessly use these 3 cubes in sync to combine their abilities along with the melee abilities of her cubes and her own hand-to-hand proficiency to be effective at close range and long-range combat. Now, let's get into the optional plot that you can choose to use to assist you or not. Many eons ago, in a different dimension, 2 beings awoke next to each other. They were friends, kings of different kingdoms, who had undergone a magical stasis for the purpose of preserving their lives, so that they may share their wisdom as rulers for future generations, along with their unique set of magical abilities. They were put in stasis together, because although they were friends, their worldviews and leadership styles were both effective in their own ways, but quite different, and the hope was that by working together, they could use these 2 different styles of leadership to have a more balanced and effective approach to leadership. At the time they had been put in this magical stasis, the civilization of their planet would have a level of technology that would be comparable to our medieval ages. When they awoke from their stasis, the level of technology of their planet would be comparable to the early stages of our Industrial Revolution, but they also made considerable advances in their magical abilities as a civilization. However, to their horror, everyone had perished, only leaving behind their technology and their written records detailing the advancements in magic they had made. Upon reading through the written records their people had left behind, the 2 former kings learned that there had been a plague of mysterious origins that had managed to slowly eliminate every last member of their species. They also learned that although this plague was of mysterious origins, it was hypothesized that this plague would itself eventually die off after enough time had passed. Thus, the devoted servants of these two kings had made the decision to extend the length of the spell of magical stasis to only be broken when it was anticipated the plague would die off. Although the two former kings were hopeful that others would have been preserved through this magical stasis, they learned that by the time the plague was discovered, it was learned that it had somehow spread so quickly that it had affected every member of their species. And although the length of time it would take before people would succumb to the plague varied greatly, between several months to several years, everyone was infected. They also eventually learned through the writings that as for others who were preserved through stasis who predated the plague, that due to how difficult this spell of stasis was to pull off, it took such a vast number of the most powerful mages and such a vast supply of expensive resources to execute that only the most rich and powerful members of royalty were put under this spell. Even the other few lucky who were put under this stasis were eventually hunted down and killed by a cult that had formed in their society, a cult that believed their entire species was destined to pass into the next life, due to the nature of this plague affecting every member of their species, and it was their responsibility to make sure that no survivors of their species would be left, as it would be an affront to destiny and those in stasis themselves. A rebellion against this cult formed, who had the opposite mindset, that the ones in stasis were seemingly accidentally put in stasis before the plague because they were in fact destined to be the sole survivors of their species. They did their best to fight against the death cult, but due to being outnumbered, they were ultimately unsuccessful in saving any of them from this fate, except for the two surviving former kings. Both groups by the end were so few in number due to the plague that in the last battle, to protect these two beloved kings, they managed to save them before they inevitably succumbed to either their battle wounds or the plague, after they had managed to preserve this history for their kings to read upon their awakening. Despite how much the kings had searched in desperation across all the land for any survivors, all they found were bones. What was most unfortunate was that in the last records left by the devoted guardians of the kings was that their civilization was soon about to make a breakthrough through their advancement in magic, science, and technology to unlock the secret to immortality. And if not for the plague, this breakthrough would allow for immortality for their entire species. So, the kings formed a pact that they would finish this breakthrough so that they could attain immortality themselves, so that they could spend as much time as needed to learn as much as they could about the advancements in magic, science, and technology that their civilization had left behind for them in an attempt to somehow revive their species. And, thanks to the plague that wiped out their species being gone, they did manage to unlock the secret to immortality. Yet, despite the many decades that passed, they failed to bring their species back. After nearly a century of trying, the two former kings decided that they would turn to the stars and search for other life out there in the universe, in the hopes that they might find some other advanced civilizations who would help them learn how to revive their species, and in hopes to help other civilizations escape the fate of their own species, whether it be through a plague, warfare, or some other calamity. After about a century of advancement in magic, science, and technology, the two former kings managed to create vessels that had the capability to not only leave the atmosphere of their planet, but also to cross the vast distances of space very quickly. they would indeed eventually find other planets with life, other civilizations, some of which were indeed very advanced in science, magic, or both. Over the centuries, the two former kings, now referring to themselves as humble pilgrims, would become incomprehensibly powerful and advanced in their magic and the technological tools they had at their disposal, thanks to the passage of time and the knowledge of magic and science they gained from the many different planets and civilizations they met. However, they never did discover the ability to bring back their species, but they never gave up on trying to find out how. They had become legendary figures, having helped many civilizations become advanced and thrive in incredible ways, yet they also saw the fall of many civilizations, sometimes through diseases, but more often through warfare. This was much to their dismay, but they pressed forward with their purpose clear in helping all these different civilizations to thrive and avoid destruction, and in hoping to eventually learn to bring back their own. At least, that is what one of the pilgrims believed. He did not know of what secret ideas, beliefs, and plans that were forming in the other pilgrim's head. It seemed that while the other pilgrim had responded to viewing the horrors and despair of seeing his species collapsed, with an unyielding desire to preserve and protect life, the other pilgrim and former king had formed a much different perspective. In the centuries they were stuck on their home world, the king had in secret been studying the writings of the death cult that had made sure there would be no survivors of their species. Over time, he started to be influenced by their point of view, but not convinced of their exact perspective. It was this, along with seeing his species gone and unable to be revived, and seeing several civilizations rise and fall despite his best efforts over the centuries, that he started to form a belief that there were only two possible truths about reality that could be true. The first possible truth about reality is that all life seemed destined to eventually perish, and it was totally unavoidable. It could only be delayed, but eventually it would all end. The second possible truth about reality is that the only way for life to survive indefinitely is through destroying the very laws of science, magic, and existence itself, if such a thing were even possible. This belief that only one of these two possible truths could be the absolute truth of reality led the pilgrim to form a plan. He and the other pilgrim had learned over the centuries that the theory of alternate universes was not just a theory, it was true. He was determined to cause a break between the walls separating these realities, and cause every single alternate universe to overlap into one, in an attempt to discover the truth. Either this would indeed lead to the end of all life in every universe, proving that life was destined to end, or through breaking the walls that separate universes, eventually he could break the very rules of science, magic, and reality of each and every universe, and from this great breaking and overlapping, a form of life would be created that transcended space, time, everything, that would be impossible to ever destroy for all of eternity. Whichever the result would be, he would view it as the destiny of life and existence itself. He viewed it as his destiny to bring this about. He trusted his friend, the king he was put in stasis with, more than anyone else, and when he told him about his plans, he was certain his most trusted friend would join him in fulfilling what he believed was their destiny. But, to his dismay, his friend was horrified at this plan and did everything he could to convince him otherwise. But the other pilgrim was far past convincing. The two pilgrims had a schism, and the Pilgrim of Breaking formed his own cult following, his own army of followers, spreading his beliefs far and wide, and before long, he and his followers learned the ability to break the walls across universes, albeit not to the scale that he wanted. The other pilgrim, the Pilgrim of Mending, formed his own army and did his best to stop the Pilgrim of Breaking. The Pilgrim of Breaking, having learned how to form cracks in the walls between universes, had started to add warriors and allies from different universes to his own, to help him have the power needed to withstand any who resisted their plans, as well as to try to discover the secrets of science and magic from other realities that would allow for greater, more wide-scale destruction of the walls between realities, so that he could cause the great breaking that he envisioned. The Pilgrim of Mending realized the only way he could have a powerful enough army to fight against the army of the Pilgrim of Breaking, as well as to discover the power needed to prevent the great breaking in the walls of reality, was to recruit allies from other realities as well to receive their help and power. Thus, the protagonists introduced in our story, and or whoever else you may add to this story, are recruits of the Pilgrim of Mending, who will eventually reveal himself to them and explain to them the situation, and the enemies that come from different universes are the recruits of the Pilgrim of Breaking, trying to fight against the Pilgrim of Mending. Again, this plot is optional, and you are free to not use any of it or only use certain elements of it and totally change it if you want. Also, you don't have to call them the Pilgrim of Mending or the Pilgrim of Breaking. You can think of different names if you want. Those are just stand-in titles in case you want to come up with something different. Now, get in that comments section, soldier, and let's write ourselves a grand and epic adventure. Adventure. Adventure.